People like you don't sit here. Get up." The sentence landed like a slap across the cabin. Sharp, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. Every head in first class turned, eyes flicking from the flight attendant in her powder blue uniform to the black man sitting calmly in seat 2 amperes. She did not whisper. She wanted the whole cabin to hear. The way her finger stabbed the air at him carried more than procedure, it carried judgment. The man in the pale yellow blazer did not move. His hand rested lightly on a tablet. A cup of coffee sat steady on the tray in front of him, the steam curling upward, untouched by the storm breaking around him. He did not argue. He did not blink. He simply looked up, calm, deliberate, and let the silence say more than words ever could. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to Marcus Carter. The insult hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman clutched her pearls tighter. A man in the third row muttered, "Did she really just say that?" Another tilted his phone subtly, the red recording light glowing like a secret alarm. The flight attendant's expression did not waver. Her lips were pressed thin, her posture stiff with authority she believed she owned. "This seat is reserved for our premium passengers," she repeated, voice louder, harsher. "You need to return to economy." Marcus did not rise. He slid his boarding pass across the table with one steady hand. The barcode gleamed under the cabin lights. His name was printed clearly, his assignment unmistakable. Seat 2 amperes, first class. But she did not glance down. She did not touch it. She did not want proof. Proof meant he belonged. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice pitched so the nearby rows could hear. "Do not make this harder. You will be escorted out if you refuse." The words were not policy, they were punishment. The cabin air grew heavy, charged with the electricity of quiet outrage. A young man in row 4 exchanged a look with his girlfriend. "This is wrong," he whispered. She lifted her phone higher, angling for a better shot. From the back, another passenger muttered, "He paid for that seat. I saw his ticket scan." But their voices were swallowed by the authority standing in front of him, uniform pressed sharp, tone dripping with dismissal. Marcus Carter remained silent. His eyes lifted from the boarding pass to meet hers directly. They were steady, unflinching, the eyes of a man who had stood in this fire before. In hotel lobbies where his ID was called fake, in boardrooms where his voice was ignored until his signature ended careers. And now, on an airplane where luxury had been promised, prejudice tried to take its place. The insult that began as one woman's voice was now the weight pressing down on every witness. They knew this was no simple seating dispute. This was about belonging, about dignity, about a man being told, once again, he did not deserve the space he had earned. And as Marcus sat anchored to his seat, calm in the eye of a storm, the stage was set. This was no longer about where he, Saturday. It was about how far they would go to push him out, and how much further he would go to remind them who truly held the power. Marcus Carter's stillness did not slow the storm. If anything, it fueled it. The flight attendant's hand hovered closer, her finger nearly grazing his lapel, as if his very presence in that pale yellow blazer was an offense against the order of the cabin. She wanted movement. She wanted obedience. Instead, she got silence. And silence, in that moment, was rebellion. Behind her, the aisle shifted. A man in a tailored Navy suit, seated in 2B, leaned back and smirked. "Why are we wasting time?" he said loudly, as though he were announcing for the entire cabin. "He clearly does not belong here. Give the seat to someone who earned it." His voice carried the casual cruelty of entitlement, the certainty that the system would always bend in his favor. The flight attendant nodded slightly, encouraged, her authority amplified by his arrogance. "Sir," she pressed again to Marcus, "this cabin is reserved for priority passengers, people of status, people who qualify. You do not." The words carried a venom sharpened by repetition, by years of practice, by the confidence that no one would challenge them. But this time, passengers were listening. In row 3, a young woman with straight black hair lowered her magazine and frowned. "I saw his ticket scan green," she whispered to her seatmate. "She is lying." A few rows back, a college student lifted his phone higher, recording without shame now. The red dot blinked, a witness that could not be silenced. He whispered to his friend, "This is going to blow up. People need to see this." Marcus remained unmoved. He lifted the cup of coffee from his tray, took a slow sip, and set it down again without a tremor. He had been through this before. At 25, applying for a bank loan, the officer had told him his assets must have been borrowed. At 32, buying his first hotel, the clerk had asked for real identification. And now, at 47, sitting in a seat he had paid for with his own name, his own card, his own company's profits, he was being told once again that none of it mattered. The flight attendant stepped back and waved toward the galley. Another staff member, younger, uncertain, approached. He looked at the boarding pass lying on the tray, his lips parting as if to speak, but the first attendant cut him off. "Do not question it. He is not supposed to be here." The young man hesitated, then glanced at Marcus. Their eyes met briefly. Marcus's expression did not change, but the weight of his calm pressed into the younger man's conscience. He looked away, retreating into silence. Meanwhile, the smirking passenger in 2B chuckled again. "Security should handle this. We do not have time for games." His wife, draped in diamonds, shifted her champagne glass and said nothing. But her silence was complicity. The cabin was no longer quiet. It was humming with tension, with judgment, with whispers recorded and shared. And Marcus, seated in 2 amperes, knew the storm had only just begun. The pressure inside the cabin thickened like smoke that refused to clear. Every second stretched longer than the last. The flight attendant crossed her arms, her chin tilted with disdain. She wanted him gone, and she wanted the entire first-class cabin to witness his removal. "Stand up now," she ordered. "This is not optional." Her voice cracked like a whip across the rows. Passengers straightened in their seats, uncomfortable but glued to the spectacle. Marcus Carter did not move. His boarding pass still rested on the tray table, its print clear, undeniable. But the truth was not the point. The point was control. And in this moment, the airline's representative believed she had it. From row 4, a woman with chestnut hair finally spoke. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice firm but polite. "I saw his scan when we boarded. That was a valid ticket." Her words sliced through the cabin like a spotlight, turning heads. The flight attendant snapped back instantly, her tone dripping with authority. "Ma'am, please remain seated. You do not know our protocols." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Other passengers began murmuring, their voices like a low tide. "She is right. I saw it too," one man whispered. Another leaned toward his neighbor. "This does not feel like protocol. This feels personal." The passenger in seat 2B, the man in the navy suit, laughed under his breath. "Why are we even debating this? Look at him. He does not fit first class. He does not even look like he belongs in business." His wife chuckled softly, as though they were sharing an inside joke. The words carried the same casual cruelty that had been weaponized against Marcus for decades. Marcus's hands folded calmly in his lap. His silence was not weakness. It was a strategy. Because every insult, every denial, every dismissal was being logged not just in the memory of the witnesses, not just in the blinking light of recording phones, but soon in the very system the crew thought would protect them. A younger flight attendant, standing near the galley, looked stricken. She glanced at the shredded remnants of authority unraveling before her eyes. She whispered almost to herself, "This is not right." But when her supervisor's glare cut across the aisle, she shrank back, clutching the tablet at her side. The cabin air felt electric now. The leather seats, the soft lights, the promise of luxury had all dissolved into the raw stench of injustice. It was no longer about comfort. It was about dignity. And the passengers who had paid for silence now found themselves unwilling witnesses to humiliation. And still, Marcus Carter remained anchored in seat 2 amperes. He had not raised his voice. He had not lifted his hand. But the weight of his stillness was shifting the room. The storm was building, and everyone knew it would break soon. The cabin trembled with tension that no turbulence could match. Every eye lingered on the man in seat 2 amperes, as if his calm defiance pulled gravity toward him. The boarding pass still lay untouched on the tray, glowing under the soft cabin lights like an unclaimed verdict. Yet the flight attendant ignored it, her arms folded tight, her voice pitched with false certainty. "You are holding up this flight," she declared. "Real passengers are waiting. This will not continue." She motioned toward the galley, signaling for backup. From the back, the flight supervisor appeared. Taller, older, with the stiff posture of authority worn too long. His footsteps down the aisle were deliberate, heavy, like a judge entering court. He stopped at Marcus's row, his eyes narrowing. "Sir, you need to comply. This seat was not meant for you. We will reassign you to a more appropriate section." The word appropriate lingered, sour and unmistakable. The couple in 2B smiled faintly, as if the verdict had already been delivered. Champagne glasses clinked softly, the sound obscene against the humiliation filling the air. Marcus lifted his eyes slowly, meeting the supervisor's gaze without a flicker of doubt. "My boarding pass says seat 2 amperes. My identification matches it. There is no mistake." His voice was steady, even, without anger. The supervisor did not glance at the ticket. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so it carried across the cabin. "Listen carefully. You can leave this seat on your own, or security will remove you. Either way, you are not staying." The air in the cabin shifted. Passengers held their breath. One man in row 5 whispered, "This is going too far." Another muttered, "Why will they not even look at his ticket?" The quiet buzz of disbelief spread like static. The younger flight attendant from earlier edged closer, her hands trembling as she clutched her tablet. She opened her mouth to speak, but the supervisor's glare silenced her before she could. She shrank back, eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. The phone cameras caught everything. The shake of her hands, the smirk on the passenger in 2B, the stubborn posture of the supervisor. And through it all, Marcus Carter's stillness. He sat as if anchored to the seat, calm in a storm that was quickly turning violent. For him, the insult was not new. At 16, he had been told in a hotel lobby that guests like you do not belong here. At 30, he had been questioned at a dealership, accused of forging documents for a car he had already purchased. The words always changed, but the meaning was the same. You do not belong. And now, decades later, that same wound was being carved open again, in front of dozens of strangers. But Marcus knew something the crew did not. He was not just a passenger. He was the storm waiting to break. From the back of the cabin, a soft gasp cut through the charged silence. A young woman in row 6, clutching a phone in both hands, whispered to the man beside her, "They are pushing him out for no reason." Her screen glowed, the red circle of a live recording catching every second. The lens trembled slightly, not from turbulence, but from outrage. The supervisor squared his shoulders, his voice projecting across the cabin. "Security has been notified. This situation will be resolved shortly." His words sounded official, but the passengers knew what they were watching had little to do with policy. It was humiliation in uniform, dressed up as procedure. The man in seat 2B, still leaning comfortably in his leather chair, laughed low. "Told you, these people try this all the time. Fake tickets, fake cards. It is a scam." His wife gave a nod, her eyes flicking toward Marcus with casual disdain, as though he were less than a guest and more like an inconvenience delaying her dinner. The younger flight attendant shifted again, her lips parting. She looked at Marcus's boarding pass, then back at her supervisor. "His name is on it," she whispered, barely audible, but the supervisor snapped his head toward her. "Stay silent," he barked. She recoiled, but her eyes burned with quiet rebellion. From the corner, another passenger spoke louder. A man in his 40s wearing a gray hoodie stood halfway in the aisle. "I watched him board. His ticket scanned green. What are you even doing?" His voice cracked the tension wide open. Heads turned, phones lifted higher. The murmur of dissent swelled. The supervisor's jaw tightened. "Sir, sit down or you will also be removed." The threat fell heavy, but it no longer carried the same weight. Too many people had seen too much. Marcus Carter had not moved. His silence was louder than the commands. His calm radiated across the cabin, making every outburst from the crew look smaller, more desperate. He placed his tablet flat on the tray, folded his hands, and simply said, "Check the system again." The flight attendant did not move. She did not want the truth. The truth would unravel her authority. Instead, she doubled down. "You do not get to tell us how to run this cabin. You will leave one way or another." The phones recorded her every word. A teenager whispered, "This is going viral." Another passenger muttered, "This feels like a courtroom, not a flight." And in many ways, it was. Marcus was on trial, judged not by his ticket or his name, but by the color of his skin and the assumptions strapped to it. The verdict had been decided before the first boarding call. But trials, even in first-class cabins, can turn. And as more witnesses raised their voices, The balance in that aisle began to tilt. The crew did not realize it yet, but their control was slipping with every second they tried to bury the truth. Marcus sat steady, a quiet center in a storm they had summoned, waiting for the moment the tide would shift completely. The atmosphere in first class had changed from uneasy to electric. Whispers turned to voices, and voices to questions that no uniform could silence. Every raised phone became another jury member, another witness. Yet the crew, blinded by certainty, pushed forward as if control could be reclaimed by sheer force of command. The flight supervisor gestured sharply toward the front. "Escort him out, now." His words struck like a gavel, cold and final. Two attendants stepped closer, one reaching for Marcus Carter's carry-on bag tucked neatly under the seat. The leather handle was lifted without permission, yanked into the aisle as though the bag itself was guilty. Gasps rippled through the cabin. "That is his property," a woman shouted from row 5. "You cannot just take it." Her voice trembled with anger, but the supervisor ignored her. The bag thudded against the wall as it was dragged away, a quiet theft disguised as procedure. Marcus did not move. He sat anchored in 2 amperes, eyes steady, his hands folded in front of him. His stillness made the chaos around him look frantic. Calmness was his weapon, and it cut deeper than any outburst. The man in 2B leaned forward, smug and cruel. "Finally, put him where he belongs." His words drew a sharp breath from a young mother 2 rows behind. She covered her child's ears, her face twisted in disbelief. The younger flight attendant, the one who had seen his ticket scan green, stepped forward again. Her voice shook, but her words carried weight. "His name is on that boarding pass. It matched when I saw it. He belongs here." The supervisor spun on her, fury burning in his eyes. "Enough. You are on probation as it is. One more word, and you will lose your job." His threat cracked across the cabin louder than the intercom, and for the first time, passengers booed. The sound was soft at first, then louder, a rising chorus of disapproval. Phones recorded the moment. The humiliation of Marcus, the smirk of the entitled passenger, the trembling bravery of a junior employee silenced by force. Clips like these were not meant to stay in the cabin. They were meant to travel further than any plane could fly. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm, controlled, a measured contrast to the chaos swirling around him. "You have my ticket. You have my identification. And yet you treat me like I am invisible. Ask yourselves why." His words carried across the cabin, quiet but undeniable, the kind of truth that lands heavier than a shout. Silence fell for a beat. Even the supervisor blinked, his authority dented by the simplicity of the question. Why? The answer hung unspoken in the air, written across every witness's face. It was not about policy, it was not about procedure, it was about perception. About a man in a pale yellow blazer who did not fit their image of wealth, and therefore did not fit their definition of belonging. And in that silence, the tide began to turn. Passengers who had whispered now looked ready to stand. The storm was no longer his alone. It was becoming theirs. The silence that followed Marcus Carter's words did not last long. It cracked open like glass under pressure, spilling into a wave of escalation that the crew could not contain. The flight supervisor snapped back into motion, his face flushed, his voice sharp enough to scrape across the cabin. Enough of this performance. Remove him now. His command was not about protocol anymore. It was about power. And when power feels it is slipping, it always strikes harder. Two attendants closed in. One reached for Marcus's arm, fingers brushing the fabric of his blazer. The contact was brief, but it was enough. The entire cabin inhaled at once, a collective gasp of outrage. "Do not touch him," a man in row 5 shouted, standing halfway into the aisle. His phone was lifted high, capturing the moment in sharp clarity. He has not done a single thing wrong, but the hand did not retreat. The attendant's grip tightened, and the act shifted from an order to an assault. Marcus's coffee cup rattled against the tray table, the ripple in the liquid mirroring the ripple of fury that surged through the cabin. From the back, a woman's voice cut through. "This is discrimination, plain and simple." She was not whispering anymore. Her words carried across the rows, undeniable. The entitled passenger in 2B chuckled, mocking the rising voices. "Discrimination? Please, it is called standards." His smirk only deepened the divide. His wife added coldly, "He should be grateful they are letting him stay on the flight at all." The cabin erupted. "That is disgusting. one passenger called out. Another muttered loudly, "This is not about standards. This is about race." Phones tilted higher, red lights blinking like signals of rebellion. Marcus did not resist. His body remained steady even as fingers clamped around his arm. His voice, calm but commanding, rose above the chaos. Every second of this is being witnessed. Every word, every action, every hand that tries to erase me. The younger attendant who had spoken before stepped forward again, her courage shaking but undeniable. "He is right," she said, her voice cracking. "I saw his scan. He belongs here. You are punishing him for existing." Her words shifted the energy again. Passengers nodded, murmuring in agreement. The weight of truth was heavier than the supervisor's threats. The supervisor barked back, desperate. "You are out of line. Step back or you will regret it." But his words did not land the way they once would have. Not with cameras rolling, not with passengers rising, not with Marcus sitting calm, his silence daring them to continue digging their own grave. The act of laying hands on him, that single moment, had crossed a line that could not be walked back. The cabin was no longer divided. It was turning against the crew. And the storm, once contained in whispers, had broken open in full view. The grip on Marcus Carter's arm lingered. A silent battle played out in the narrow aisle of first class. The leather seats gleamed under the cabin lights, but there was no comfort left here. The moment had shifted from inconvenience to outright violation, and everyone knew it. "Security is on the way," the flight supervisor barked, his tone cracking like brittle wood. He believed that escalation was strength. He did not realize it was collapse. Marcus turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting the attendant holding him. His voice was low, calm, deliberate. "Take your hand away. You are crossing a line that will cost you everything." The attendant hesitated, eyes flicking toward the supervisor for reassurance. But in that hesitation, the truth was clear. He knew the line had already been crossed. From row 6, a passenger stood. She was young, mid-20s, with a laptop still open on her tray. "He has done nothing wrong," she said firmly. Her phone recorded every word. "You are assaulting a paying customer in his rightful seat." Her voice broke the last barrier. More passengers spoke up. "Check the system again," one demanded. "Show us the log," shouted another. The whispers had grown into a chorus of defiance. Marcus did not raise his voice, but the weight of his words cut deeper than any shout. He reached calmly into his blazer pocket, sliding out a sleek earpiece. He pressed it into place and spoke with quiet authority. "Rachel, initiate protocol. Log everything. Record every violation. We are moving to stage 1. The cabin stilled, not because the crew understood what he meant, but because his tone shifted the air. It was not the voice of a man begging for fairness. It was the voice of a man activating power. On the other end of the line, his assistant's voice came crisp and steady. "Understood, Mr. Carter. Protocol is live. Every word is being captured and relayed to corporate compliance. Video feeds are syncing now." Phones across the cabin lit up brighter as passengers realized they were no longer just recording for social media. They were witnesses in a larger trial, one that reached beyond the walls of the aircraft. The supervisor's face drained of color, but he pressed forward, refusing to surrender. "You are bluffing," he spat. "This little performance will not work." Marcus finally lifted his eyes fully, locking onto him with a gaze that did not waver. "I am not bluffing. I am documenting. And when this is over, you will not be walking back down this aisle as crew. You will be walking off this aircraft as unemployed." Gasps spread again. The crew froze, caught between disbelief and dawning fear. The passengers leaned in, hungry for the reveal they could sense coming. The storm was no longer building. It had begun, and Marcus Carter, calm and unshaken, had just taken control of the first strike. The words hung in the air like thunder, echoing through every row of the cabin. "You will not be walking back down this aisle as crew. You will be walking off this aircraft as unemployed." The threat was not shouted. It was delivered like a verdict already signed. The supervisor stiffened, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, he saw something he had not expected: certainty. Marcus Carter was not bluffing. He was not panicking. He was not begging. He was moving with the calm precision of someone who had prepared for this very moment. Passengers whispered furiously. A man in a business suit leaned forward, phone tilted high. "Did you hear that? He said he is documenting this for corporate." Another voice cut in from behind. "What if he really does work for them?" The murmurs spread like fire, leaping row to row. The flight attendant, still gripping Marcus's arm, released him at last, stepping back as though the fabric of his blazer burned to the touch. Her hands trembled, her confidence evaporating under the stares of dozens of witnesses. The entitled passenger in 2B scoffed loudly, clinging to arrogance. "This is ridiculous. He is just bluffing. People like him always play the victim card." His words, once welcomed by silence, now drew open disgust. A woman across the aisle shook her head. "That is not the victim card. That is the truth." Another added, "If he owns part of this airline, you will regret every word you just said." "No." The young flight attendant, the one who had dared to speak earlier, lifted her chin. Her voice was firmer now, louder, strengthened by the passengers around her. "I saw his name on the manifest this morning. He is not lying. His ticket was flagged as VIP level clearance." The cabin gasped. Cameras zoomed in. The supervisor spun toward her, his voice cracking with fury. "You will stop this right now." But the words did not land. Not anymore. Authority had shifted. It was no longer in the uniforms. It was in the voices of the witnesses, in the glow of recording screens, and most of all, in the stillness of Marcus Carter. He finally rose from his seat, slowly, deliberately. His movements carried weight, as if the entire aisle bowed beneath him. He looked directly at the supervisor, then at the crew, then at the man in 2B, whose smirk faltered. "My name is Marcus Carter," he said, each word steady as stone. "I am not a stowaway. I am not a fraud. I am the majority shareholder of this airline, and you just laid hands on the man who signs your paychecks." The cabin erupted. Gasps, shouts, applause. The sound was not chaos, it was revelation. The tide had turned, completely and irreversibly. The crew froze where they stood, pale and silent. Their authority had collapsed in 5 simple words. "I am the majority shareholder." And the passengers, once quiet observers, now leaned forward as if witnessing history. The storm had broken, and Marcus Carter was standing firmly at its center. For a moment, the cabin was nothing but stunned silence. The sentence had landed heavier than turbulence, heavier than any command the crew had barked all night. "I am the majority shareholder of this airline," the words echoed, filling every corner of the aircraft. The supervisor's mouth opened, but no words came. His authority, once sharp as steel, had shattered into pieces too small to hold. The attendants glanced at one another, panic rising like a tide. The man in seat 2B, once smug, shifted uncomfortably. His wife clutched her glass of champagne, her hand trembling for the first time. From the back of the cabin, the young passenger filming whispered into her phone, "You are seeing this live. The man they tried to throw out of first class owns the airline. They just humiliated their boss in front of all of us." Her words rippled across the cabin, repeating in murmurs, in disbelief, in awe. The younger flight attendant, the one who had spoken earlier, straightened her posture as though her courage had been validated. "I told you," she said loudly, her voice ringing clear. "His name was in the system. He is not just a passenger, he is the airline." Applause erupted from a handful of passengers, hesitant at first, then swelling into full claps that filled the space like thunder. Phones angled higher, capturing every face of shock and fear painted across the crew. Marcus Carter remained steady. He did not bask in the applause, nor did he smirk at their fear. His expression carried only weight, the gravity of a man who had endured this humiliation too many times before. His calm made the revelation even more powerful, as if justice itself had taken a seat beside him. The supervisor finally found his voice, but it was cracked and brittle. "This changes nothing," he stammered. "Protocol is protocol. We were following procedure." A passenger in row 5 barked back. "Procedure is not ripping up a man's ticket. Procedure is not stealing his bag. Procedure is not laying hands on him." His words drew nods and murmurs of agreement from across the rows. Another passenger, an older woman with silver hair and a sharp gaze, stepped into the aisle. Her voice was steady and strong. "You did not just insult a man, you insulted every person who has ever been told they do not belong, and now you are facing the consequences." The crew looked cornered, their posture sagged, their eyes darting to one another, to the supervisor who now stood smaller than ever. The hierarchy they had clung to had collapsed in front of witnesses who would never forget. Marcus lifted his hands slightly, and the cabin quieted. His voice carried the calm of inevitability. You thought you could erase me from this seat. Instead, you have erased yourselves from this company." Gasps and murmurs swept through the cabin again. The crew paled further, realizing that what was coming was no longer a possibility. It was a promise. And as passengers leaned forward in anticipation, the balance of power had shifted completely. The airline was no longer theirs to control. It belonged, visibly and undeniably, to Marcus Carter. The weight of Marcus Carter's words pressed down on the cabin like gravity itself. "You have erased yourselves from this company." The passengers erupted into a wave of shocked whispers and applause, while the crew stood paralyzed in uniforms that suddenly looked more like shackles than symbols of authority. The flight supervisor tried to hold his ground, but his hands trembled as he clutched the edge of the galley wall. You cannot just fire us here," he muttered, his voice breaking. His words sounded less like defiance and more like a plea. Marcus's gaze did not waver. He touched the earpiece at his temple, his voice steady, calm, undeniable. "Rachel, log this incident in the system. Lock access credentials for Supervisor James Walker and the attendants who participated in this violation." A crisp voice answered through the earpiece, audible to those closest to him. "Confirmed, Mr. Carter. Locking credentials now. All affected profiles are being terminated in real time." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. One attendant fumbled for her badge, swiping it against the cabin's secure panel. The screen flashed red. Her eyes widened in horror. Another tried his phone, but the app that granted staff access had already gone dark. Passengers began cheering, clapping, some even laughing in disbelief. One man shouted from the back, "Justice in real time! They are out right now!" A young woman live streaming whispered into her camera, "This is insane. They just lost their jobs mid-flight. Their badges went red in front of us." The supervisor's face drained of color. He pulled out his ID card, swiped again and again. Each attempt met with the cold red light of denial. His jaw clenched, his voice cracked. "This is not possible." Marcus finally rose fully from his seat. His presence filled the aisle, commanding more authority than any uniform could ever claim. His words cut through the noise with surgical precision. "You thought a seat was power. You thought a uniform was power. But real power does not shout. Real power does not beg. Real power logs in and removes you with one command." The cabin erupted again, applause rolling like thunder. Passengers stood to clap, others raised their phones higher, capturing every frozen expression on the crew's faces. The younger attendant, the one who had dared to speak truth earlier, stood taller now, her eyes bright. She whispered to herself, though others heard, "I knew it. I knew he was more than what they said." The man in seat 2B, once smug, now slumped into his chair. His arrogance dissolved into silence. His wife stared at Marcus with wide eyes, her diamond bracelet clinking nervously against the armrest. Marcus turned, his eyes sweeping across the passengers who had witnessed everything. "Remember what you saw here today. Injustice will always try to disguise itself as protocol, but dignity will always unmask it." The crew stood broken, their badges useless, their authority stripped away in front of the very passengers they had tried to impress. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the cabin felt light again, filled not with hostility but with justice fulfilled in real time. The roar of applause slowly faded into a steady silence, the kind that carries respect rather than fear. Marcus Carter stood in the aisle, calm, composed, his presence commanding the entire cabin. The crew who had mocked him, touched him, and torn his boarding pass now stood powerless, their badges flashing red like scarlet letters branding their downfall. He did not gloat, he did not shout. He simply looked at them and spoke with quiet gravity. "You thought the seat was the problem. It was never the seat. The problem was your belief that I did not deserve it, and that belief just cost you everything." Gasps rippled once more, but this time they carried no shock, only agreement. Passengers nodded, some clapping softly, others wiping tears they had not expected to shed on a flight that was supposed to be routine. The young woman live streaming whispered into her phone, "This is history. This is justice happening in front of us." The younger attendant, who had dared to speak truth earlier, now stood behind Marcus, her posture straight, her voice clear. "He belonged here all along," she said. And in that statement, she spoke not just for Marcus, but for every person who had ever been told they did not belong. Marcus adjusted his blazer, reclaimed his seat, and lifted his tablet once more. The cabin, once a courtroom, now felt like a sanctuary. Around him, passengers whispered words of respect, dignity, power, strength. The hum of the engines was the only sound that dared to compete with his silence, and when he finally looked up again, his closing words carried the weight of a lifetime. I do not need to record videos to prove myself. I am the result of them. Remember that the next time you think someone does not belong. The cabin erupted in applause one final time. Cameras flashed. Streams went live across the world. And in that moment, Marcus Carter was no longer just a man in seat 2 amperes. He was a symbol. Justice had not shouted. It had spoken softly, and it had won.